Welcome, everyone, to Boxing Scenes, top stories only on ProBox TV, your boxing channel. I am George DeMatteis, and boy, do we have a lot to talk about. And to get their insights, their brilliant insights, we got the champions. We have Paulie Malignaggi and Chris Algieri here on Top Stories. All right, champs, let's talk about that card this past weekend with Terence Crawford headlining his victory over Israil Madrimov. A lot of criticism from Riyadh season saying that the card was too long, even though there were some good fights, and then all the extracurricular activities in between. All right, Paulie, how could it be done better to help the fans out with that situation?
Well, I'll tell you what, there's going to be pros and cons to every situation, right? The goal ultimately for everyone in boxing is to make things always get better, right? So the positives and the pros are we're getting great matchups. We're getting great shows, great matchups. There's very competitive fights. There's been 2 or 3 upsets in each of these Riyadh season cards if you really go back to when they started. So the competitiveness of the matchups is something new in boxing. You're getting directly competitive matchups and not just a guy who you know is going to win against a pretty good fighter, but you already know the result beforehand. Not the case with Riyadh season. Now, the other side of it is that, of course, you know, a little bit long-winded. Sometimes these cards are a bit longer, and people will say, "Oh, well, the UFC cards are also long." Yeah, but they're not this long. Number one, and number two, they keep it business. It's all fights, one fight after another fight after another fight after another fight. We really don't. Fight fans don't really need the casual stuff. They don't really need the Eminem performance and all that. Give us great fights, and we'll be really, really appreciative. And that's what they've been doing. I think if you have the best interests in mind, though, they can't all be pay-per-view. I think if you make these cards 2, 3, maybe 4 fights at most, maybe put them on regular DAZN or regular cable or whatever, and you mix them up, you divide them maybe 1 per month instead of 4 or 5 every year, and they're super long. I think that also keeps a consistency going, and people would appreciate it if some of them are free. Of course, you negate the big super fight guys. Of course, we understand those are going to be pay-per-view, but you can build to those as well. These have been great cards. I think, again, there's things to work on as well as things to appreciate, and I think it's a work in progress. I'll put it that way.
All right, but Chris, 8 hours long. How could it have been better when it comes to this whole fight card in the Riyadh season?
8 hours is a long time. I'm actually going to wear my sunglasses because I'm still tired from that late night. But listen, champ, you made a lot of great points, and there is a lot of positives to speak of. A couple that you didn't mention that I just want to touch on. One, fighter pay. These guys are making big money for these fights. Some of the fighters really deserve a lot more money. I am always happy when fighters are making more money. 2, we're getting the promotions across the street. So we're able to make fights that generally, a lot of times throughout the years, we've always said, it's a tough fight to make because there's different promotions. And I think a lot of casual fans don't really understand that. So now we're coming into a time where actually these fights are actually being made. In terms of the mechanics of fight night and it being very, very long, the casual stuff, the outside the ring stuff, yeah, I think that's kind of growing pains and something that needs to be worked out with the promotion over time. And this is all kind of like it's the very first event in the States. And yes, we're getting good fights. It was a good card. There was a lot of good fights on the card throughout. But when you have a card filled with good competitive championship fights, a lot of times you're getting razor-thin decisions, you're getting close fights, you're getting draws, you're not getting all these explosive, fun fights with knockouts and whatnot. And I think that's part of it. If you look at like the old model of pay-per-views from like the 90s, those top-ranked shows and some of those Showtime cards, you would have certain kinds of fights that were on the card. Yes, you had the headliner, you had the reason that, the old school, the old way of doing pay-per-views, you had that headliner at the top. That's the guy why you're buying the pay-per-view. Then underneath that, you would have a competitive matchup, maybe it's a lighter weight, but you're guaranteeing some action. Then listen, then you'd have like a Butterbean. You'd have a 4-rounder where you're going to have a knockout. That's what Butterbean was for. You tuned in. It was kind of a sideshow, but he was entertaining. Then we had Christy Martin back then. She was always an entertaining fight. So you would see the pay-per-view model back then where they rounded out the whole card to make it interesting from beginning to end. And not just making the most competitive fights, not just making great matchups like we saw on this card where we had a lot of that, but it's the entertainment value. And I think that's part of what it was missing. You got the outside of the ring stuff, but boxing fans want to see good boxing. And I think there's a lot of potential here between all the points that you made, champ, and all the idea that these fights are being made that we weren't going to see. But I think there's some things that can be worked out, just like anything. It's a growing process. It's the first time over here for Riyadh season in the States, and apparently Turkey wants to do more of that, which is great. We're all for that. We want to see these competitive matchups, see these fights. But I think the logistics of the actual fight night can be made better.
I'll tell you what, though. I'll tell you one thing. If I can just make one last point. I talk about if you're going to grow the sport, you can't just stick to the pay-per-view model. From what I'm hearing, it costs $5 million to put that M&M performance together. You can save that $5 million and make the card free, or at least divide the card in half and make that free, and that way they're not all pay-per-views. I think it's an important point to make that if you want to grow the sport and you want to grow the eyeballs on Saudi, because this is also about growing the eyeballs about Saudi as well, according to Turki Alalshikh. I think making some of these cards free is important. So maybe shortening them up a little bit, keeping the great. Nobody's going to complain about the matchups. The matchups are excellent, but I'd like to see them maybe a little shorter. Maybe some of these even be free, or at least free to the cable provider that you're subscribed to, or the channel you're subscribed to, like DAZN. And I think you can bring in even more casual fans. But I don't think there's a necessity to take away these kind of great fights. It's just maybe divide the card in half. It reminds me of, you guys remember, some of the old school fans will remember, it was KO Nation on HBO and ShoBox on Showtime. If you remember, they came out around the same time. KO Nation had more frills. It had the rappers, it had the big ring entrances, they had the show, plus the prospects used to fight. ShoBox was just strictly prospects. I remember when it first started, it had no ring entrances, no show, just straight to the point. Fights, fights, fights. Which one lasted longer?
I was going to say
KO Nation didn't last very long.
KO Nation didn't work at all.
ShoBox, yeah, exactly. And ShoBox lasted for almost 2 decades, until it was with Showtime till the end of Showtime Boxing. So I think that the point being made there is that boxing fans, they don't care about the frills. You can save that money. We don't need the M&M performance, especially that on the East Coast. By the time the main event got in the ring, it was 1 a.m. These are not criticisms. These are more so, we love what's being done. We want to see it. The potential, we just want to see it reach its full potential. I think I speak for all boxing fans when I say that.
Champ, you made a point about the Eminem concert. I mean, Eminem walked out, Crawford when he fought Spence. Is there any more value to having Eminem actually perform? Because at home, I don't think it came across, as probably while you're in there, it's cool, but also super late. But I mean, I was in the room when Crawford walked out with Eminem. I mean, the pop that was in there, the way it looked on TV, walking to the ring. You don't have to have a poor performance. People are there for the fights, especially before the main event.
But the walkout and stuff like that, that's all barbershop talk. That's cool. That's cool to bring up in the barbershop the next week. Oh, you see what he did. He walked out with that. But you don't, again, if we look at boxing history, boxing fans don't typically care for the frills. If you give boxing fans great matchups, they tune in, man. And not only they tune in, they tell their friends, and they love that stuff. And I think that's the positive about this. Boxing fans are all talking about the great matchups that are being made on these shows. It's just a matter of trimming the fat a little bit.
Like I said, logistics of the fight night.
Yeah, one thing for sure, boxing and casual fans, they love free. And on Twitter, when I was watching the fights, everybody was saying, we don't need the M&M. Let's just get to the fight and the main event. All right. Paulie and Chris, thank you very much for your insights. As usual, brilliant stuff from our champions here on ProBox TV. Don't forget, scan the QR code to go to ProBoxTV.com and like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. I'm George DeMatteis. This is Boxing Scenes Top Stories.
Wednesday Night Fights.
Dynamite action on Wednesday Night Fights every other Wednesday on your boxing channel.
Coming up on your next Wednesday Night Fights, August 21st. Former Unified World Champion Swift Jarrett Hurd takes on former Unified World Champion Jason Banana Rosario. Live from the ProBox Event Center in Plant City. Get your tickets at ProBoxTV.com or take your chances at the door. Wednesday Night Fights.
For more ProBox TV, scan the QR code on the screen or go to the App Store and Google Play. ProBox TV, your boxing channel.